Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. I think you guys are going to want to come film this.
Put him out, put him out, put him out, put him out, put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that they call Shayn.
You're doing the Alex Jones voice a little bit there.
Hey, I'm excited, man. Alex Jones is back, man. He's crazier than ever. He's doing his own thing, man. I gotta get excited, man. I got in the Alex Jones flavor again, man.
That sounds like a personal problem. But anyway, I'm the big bad boo daddy, Orin Felix.
The baddest
so
daddy.
We're going to start off with a little bit of updates, not necessarily news. And this is not necessarily a cryptid, fun piece of news and updates. This is real world big boy stuff. But to make this just as quick as I can, so the company I work for, that I've worked for forever, just got bought out. So we're doing like all sorts of like corporate takeover bullshit right now. And the joke I've been making through this process is I was trying real hard to get laid off and I fucked around and got a promotion. So basically, long story short, right now, for the foreseeable future, I'm not going to have like the time to devote to the show that, I previously had. It's been real hard for me to put together notes and do research and things like that. So, I'm going to have to take a bit of a step back. The show's not going anywhere. We're going to try to figure out how to work around this. Hopefully this is not a permanent thing. But yeah, so for the next few months, the show probably is going to look a little bit different, and we might have to figure some things out on the fly, but as long as I can pull this off, I'm going to stick with it. I'm not going to try to leave you guys in the lurch, but anyway, so that's kind of where we're at right now. Corporate takeovers are not fun, so I don't recommend anybody doing that if they can avoid it. But anyway,
avoid corporate America. But as far as the show goes, for anybody that's kind of wondering how the format's going to temporarily change until we kind of get stuff rolling back a little bit, you guys are going to be seeing some more interviews on the show. We'll make sure that we bring you guys some of the best guests we possibly can to bring you guys some interesting conversation and stuff in the process. You might see some more of the episodes that I throw together, such as like my theory type episodes and stuff. But at least for the time being, you got to roll with the punches. The show isn't going anywhere. We're still having fun doing it. We just got to kind of throw around the format a little bit. But once hopefully everything gets settled down with Orin and everything, we'll be diving back into the deep dives and stuff like that. But at least for now, we're going to be covering a little bit more of my theory episodes and have a little bit more guests on the show. But that's at least for now. But we'll come back around. We're not going anywhere, so don't be afraid. Just because last month that was all the holidays and everything, that wasn't showing how the future of the show is going to be. We're back. We're going to make it work. And even if Orin isn't able to make it one week, I'll make sure I keep everything rolling, and you'll still end up seeing me with a guest on. So that's at least that part of the updates.
And as always, another piece of news and updates. Bizarre Inquiries are now YouTube live mini show. That's not really mini anymore. You guys be sure to submit questions and articles and videos, anything you want us to inquire about, just shoot that our way. And Shayn, I think you've got some more things to add to Bizarre Inquiries.
Yep, considering that's going to be a YouTube live show, with that, of course, it means that you guys will also be able to hop into the chat, throw your ideas and everything in while we're live on the show. And of course, we will read them on the show, get you guys more involved, because that's kind of the intention behind it, is that we want to make that more of like a fun sit down, everybody kind of gets involved kind of show, because that was the intention in the first place. And doing like the pre-recording of it, it kind of makes it hard for you guys to get involved. So with that, of course, we're going to announce it like a day or so early when we go to do those episodes. I think the first one that we're going to do live starting off is going to be January 23rd. So if anybody wants to mark that on their calendars, probably be happening around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 23rd. But with that format, of course, like I said, you guys will be able to hop into the chat and everything. And we're also going to extend it where it's probably going to happen once a month or so, probably. And they're probably going to be hour-long episodes. So we'll probably have like 3 articles, 3 clips, 3 whatever going through it. And considering we have the 3, there's going to be a lot of episodes with just Orin and I, but it also opens the opportunity for us to be able to have guests on with us, and everybody can kind of bring an article or a clip or whatever and share it. So even on the other side, if there's any other like podcasters or researchers or anything like that you guys would like to see us bring onto Bizarre Inquiries, always happy to take suggestions for that. You guys kind of see who we roll with and stuff. So if you guys, really enjoy one of these like interview episodes we do and you guys want to see that person on Bizarre Inquiries, throw the idea in and we could probably make it happen.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, if anybody out there wants to be a guest on the show or get up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shayn, tell them how they can do that.
Number 1, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, spelled exactly like the name, so you guys know how to spell it. You guys can also get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook, of course, are the best ways to do it. And you guys can also go to the Linktree, which has a submission form, which goes directly to our email, whether you want to report an encounter, or you want to be a guest on the show, or you possibly just want to like throw in your opinion on something. We're always happy to hear it. We love hearing from you guys. Or the last option you guys got, you guys can either call in or text our hotline number. If you guys want to leave a voicemail that we can share on the show, whether it's, saying how much you love the show, hopefully not how much you hate the show, maybe even sharing your encounters. We could definitely bring that into the mix.
We don't blame you.
But we might still play them on the show. We just might talk a little bit of shit. But I mean, that's kind of expected if you're going to talk shit. We gotta throw some shit back a little bit. But
if we get 1-star reviews, I think we should also read those. That would be even funnier than reading 5-star reviews.
Oh, definitely. I'm going to start. Not that we've gotten any 1-star reviews, and I'm not telling anybody to go out there and do it.
I'm gonna leave one tonight.
This show sucks. The co-hosts are awful. They're fucking bizarre. But
not in a good way.
And not in a good way. But that hotline number is 313-364-1551. You guys can also find that down the show notes to make it quick and easy. But yeah, call in, utilize that number. I've gotten a couple calls. Actually, I got one, but it was for Inquiries of Our Reality, with somebody saying I talk too fast. And that's just how I think. I'm sorry. That's just how I talk. But hopefully you use the line for the good intentions here. But
or 1-star reviews.
Or 1-star reviews.
And all of this shit we've mentioned, as always, is in the link tree in the show description.
What is up, Bizarre-ites, and welcome to the show. Today for you guys, we are sitting down with Eli Watson, one of the minds behind Small Town Monsters. Anybody that's familiar with those projects, I'm sure that you've seen him on numerous documentaries. He's the guy that's always wearing the hat. I mean, I guess you and Alex both kind of always wear the hat, but he's the one with the mustache that wears the hat. But please welcome to the show, Eli Watson.
Hey, it's great to be here, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, Eli, thank you so much for joining us tonight. When Shayn told me you were coming on, I was super excited to kind of pick your brain a little bit. Of course, I'm a big fan of all the small town monster stuff, like I know most of our listeners are. So it's a pleasure to have you on tonight.
Hey, the pleasure's all mine, man.
Well, I guess a good spot to get started for anybody that may not be familiar with Small Town Monsters, which would be absolutely surprising if you're listening to this show and you're not aware of Small Town Monsters. But for anybody that may not know, why don't you let them know a little bit about your background, what exactly you dive into, and what it's like working with Small Town Monsters?
Yeah, I guess, gosh, I don't know where to start. Basically, I make documentaries about Bigfoot and UFOs at times. So mostly it's been about Bigfoot lately. And so I do that through a company called Small Town Monsters. So I basically was brought on to build up the YouTube channel. That's when me and Alex started back in the day on Beyond the Trail. But I've kind of gone up. I wouldn't say I've gone up a level, but I also do mainline movies now as well. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I don't think you'd started that last time we talked yet, or you were in the process of starting it up.
Yeah, I think since last we talked, we had Cursed Waters came out. So that's about Ogopogo, the lake monster. and went to British Columbia, went to Lake Okanagan, filmed that. And so that's out on Amazon. You can rent that on Amazon now. So like, that's where it's like, it's a little different because it's not on YouTube, you know, it's not free to watch or whatnot. So it's on Amazon. And then I'm working on Ape Canyon right now, the Siege at Ape Canyon. So that will also be on Amazon later this year.
That's awesome. So, you know, you said you're involved in a lot of kind of Sasquatch and UFO type documentaries. What's your favorite project? I'm sure it's like choosing between your children, but if you had to choose one of the documentaries or the projects that you've worked on that is either your favorite or is just kind of special to you, which one would that be, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, it's not a singular one, but it's a series I did called Bigfoot, The Road to Discovery. And so I did that about the Olympic Project and the Nest site. And it's about it's a 10 episode series that's all on YouTube. It's all free to watch. And just kind of, I started it, I think it's 2025 now. So I started it in December 2023 and it went till about September of last year. And I kind of throughout the course of making that show, I became real close friends with everyone in the Olympic Project. So it became like an increasingly more personal series as it went on till the very end, you know, and I was expecting backlash for the final episode where it wasn't even about Bigfoot evidence. It was just about the fact that everyone became my friend. And I was like, you know, it's a very rare thing. You know, you do a lot of these documentaries and, you know, you interview these people and then you don't talk to them until it comes out. And then once it comes out, you don't really speak to them again. And that's just kind of the nature of the business, you know? So it's very rare when you become very good friends with people that you're working with, you know, and then, and the fact that because then that bleeds into the project as well. As they become your friends, they're more comfortable with you and they share more intimate things that they wouldn't necessarily share with other interviewers and things like that. So I think just plus where I was mentally when I started the show, you know, I was in a creative burnout, and then that kind of just brought that creativity back to me. You know, I was like, wow, this docu-series just kind of changed my life for sure. I definitely made lifelong friends there. So
that's awesome.
Seems like when you get into a rut with creativity, that first project, when you come back, it always ends up being everybody's favorite every time you ask them. Like, I don't know what it is about that, but like some of the like most famous authors, like their best novel they ever wrote was one right after they were done with the slump. Then all of a sudden they came back and they just full threaded through it. But I mean, double on that one. You got the documentary done, you made some friends in the process, and I'm sure that ends up leading into other stuff, especially with the Olympia Project, because I know they're always out there doing different stuff. So, you know, being friends with those guys, they find something new and interesting. I'm sure you're going to be one of the first people that hears about it.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about it too, because that was a very, it was February of last year. And the concept behind the show was that it was originally was that it was going to just keep going like forever. And I remember Shayn Orin of the Olympic Project, he gave me a call and he said, you know, we don't want this show to keep going forever. We don't want this to turn into a thing where it's like you're just following us around in the woods as we don't find things. Because like, part of what makes those first like 5 episodes really strong, in my opinion, is the fact that it's a compilation of their research efforts over the past 10 years. You know, so it's like every single episode, you don't just have one audio file. You have multiple audio files. You have multiple track finds. You have multiple bits and pieces of evidence coming together in a single episode. Well, that's only really possible if it's over the course of years and years and years, you know, because 95% of the time you go out in the woods, nothing happens. And that's what I think that's what sets that show apart from a lot of the other shows that, you know, even I've produced, you know, because I've gone out plenty of times where it's like, I got to make an episode out of this and then nothing happens. It's like, well, how many times can you do well, we went out in the woods and nothing happened, you know, it gets kind of boring. So, Yeah, so we talked about bringing the show to a close for now, and then maybe revisiting down the line in 5-6 years once they've collected more evidence. So,
see that ends up kind of piecing stuff together a little bit better, anyways, because then you don't get burned out on the same project. It makes it so that you can kind of go in spurts. Because after a certain point, if you're just continuously doing the same project, you're going to want to move on to something else. But if you got something that you really care about, you can do it in chunks. It makes it so that it kind of brings back the creativity in it. It doesn't get to a point where it starts feeling stagnant, and in turn for people watching, it ends up kind of becoming stagnant, like you said, with, you know, just how much walking in the woods can you possibly do. But, you know, revisiting the project always kind of makes it too, so it brings in a new light, because then you can watch the previous one, and anything you want to improve on, you know, everybody has that creative thing where they wish they could go back and redo it. It gives you that opportunity to keep improving as you go on, instead of like working on one documentary, that's it and it's done, and then the next one you move on to, it's not staying in that same series where you can correct the little things that you wanted to do in the last one. It like gives you an opportunity to fix stuff up.
Yeah, even during the course of that show, you know, it's like by the time I finished episode 10, I went back and I rewatched the first episode, and I was like, oof, I would change this, I would change that. You know, it's like, I just put this one together 9 months ago, and I'm already thinking that way. You know, how am I going to feel in 5 years? It's like I would redo this whole thing. You know, so.
Well, I think you know, it's kind of cool that you mentioned you wanted to stop the program and the series before it got to the point where, you know, you're just going out in the woods and not finding anything. And I think that's what really sets the Small Town Monsters projects apart from, you know, not to disparage anything, but kind of like the more like Discovery Channel, you know, Bigfoot encounters type programs where it's not sensationalized, and it's not just for TV. It's real information, and it's real people and real stories. And I think that really comes through in the content. And it's, in my opinion, just a cut above, you know, a lot of the, like I say, Discovery History Channel type cryptid content. And, you know, anybody who I think is not a fan of, you know, that kind of stuff should like look at your guys' content, because it's a totally different animal, no pun intended, than a lot of the cryptid content that people are used to, I think.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, you know, especially me when I'm coming into a project, you know, the last thing I want to do is make another Finding Bigfoot. You know, it's like Finding Bigfoot's been done. They went for what, 10 seasons or whatever. There's over 100 episodes. If you want that, you can go watch that. You know what I mean? I'm not going to make that.
Exactly.
And so like, that was the other thing too. I chose the Olympic project specifically for that, you know, purpose, because, you know, I had done like 9 episodes of Mysteries and Monsters. That was my previous show I did before Road to Discovery. And that was heavily based on, you know, I was jumping around from different topics. I did UFO episodes, Bigfoot episodes. Cursed Waters, the Ogopogo movie, was actually conceived of as an episode for that show. Before it became, once we saw the story, we realized it could be bigger. And I didn't want to do something that was like necessarily in the field as much. I wanted something where there was research that had been done already, and it was just waiting to be told correctly, you know? And so like it did change my approach to future projects as well, because now that's what I look for. I don't necessarily want to be the guy out in the woods, you know, with the night vision looking around. I still do that from time to time, for sure, but
it's fun.
I'm always looking for a story within, you know, and so, and it can be tough, you know, because, you know, there's lots of books on Sasquatch that are written, but no one writes the books on stuff that's happened between researchers, and you know, there's a lot of drama in the field. Not necessarily that I'm looking for the drama, but you know, that's like one of the things I'm really excited about with my next series, Bigfoot Mountains of Mystery, which comes out here at the end of January. Talk about some juice. I mean, I got some people talking very candidly on camera about stuff that happened, and I'm really excited because I think it's going to turn things upside down.
Hold on tight, guys. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but
To stay up to date on the show, check out Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Discord, and the TikToks.
Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can get back into the show. And now back to the show. Have you released anything from that project yet? Because I'd love to talk about it. And if you want to kind of share some of the stories maybe so you can kind of hype it up and get people interested in it, man, I'd love to hear what you're collecting for it.
We shared the trailer during a live stream a little bit ago, but the trailer itself has not been uploaded to YouTube yet. So I think it will be eventually, or at least shared to social media. And I think, so calling it a show about the Sierras is a little disingenuous, but the Sierra Nevada mountain range, obviously, like the most famous thing that came from there is the Sierra Sounds, which at this moment in time, there aren't solid plans to cover that story. Although I would absolutely love to, because it's another one that's like, sure, there's been documentaries done on it and whatnot, but it doesn't have the Eli Watson touch to stroke my own ego there. But
I mean, Ron Moorhead seems to be a section in a lot of stuff, but I haven't seen like a full, honest documentary on everything with the Sierra Sounds. It's like he goes on podcasts and he talks about everything, and you hear all these like out there stories, which I think is why a lot of people tend to avoid it, is because of like the giant like light orb sticks and all that kind of stuff that he mentioned seeing out there. But yeah, it's usually like portions of documentaries. I've never seen like a solid, this is Ron Moorhead and everything that's happened in the Sierra Sounds, and like that perspective I have not seen yet.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, because it was like there's a lot going on there with the Sierra Sounds, and even after the Sierra Sounds with other people and stuff, and it's like there's a lot to do with that, and there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, there's Yosemite Valley and the Sierras, which I haven't seen anyone do anything on, and there's reports aren't very prominent from Yosemite Valley because it is so. I mean, they get, I forget, millions and millions of people come there every single year. So it's like, I don't think many animals, much less Sasquatch, would want to hang around millions and millions of people, But there are reports from surrounding areas. You have the sequoias, some of the largest trees on Earth. In fact, the largest tree on Earth is in Sequoia National Park. And the sequoias were, according to the Native American tribe, I forget the name of the tribe, but they never lived in the Sierra, in the sequoias. The sequoias were always the home to the forest people, aka who is that? You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, that's interesting. And there's audio that comes from the sequoias. But the biggest thing with the Sierras that I'm covering is, digging up a little bit of old dirt here with the whole Justin Smea thing. I'm not sure if you guys know what that is, but Justin Smea claimed to have shot and killed 2 Sasquatch in the Sierras back in 2010. And that's
what's the backstory to that? Like, I think I've heard of it vaguely, but like, do you know like the setup on like how he got in that position, like how it happened exactly?
Yeah, so Justin and his partner, hunting partner, were up there hunting bear, and they had left out, I'll just tell the story, they had left out a bucket full of meat to try to lure in some bear. So they set it out in the morning, came back to the spot later that afternoon, and Justin claims that he saw what he thought was a bear, and then it stood up on 2 legs. And Justin being Justin, well, I shouldn't say that. He was 24 years old, and I'm 26 now. I remember being 24 very, very well. And you do things without really thinking about it, because a lot of people would be like, why would he do that? Well, he was 24 and maybe a little trigger happy. So this thing stands up. He immediately thinks, holy cow, this is a Bigfoot, and shoots at it. He says he shot it below the ribs, and it turns around and starts running off into the woods, where he shoots it again, this time hitting it in the back, and it still took off into the woods. And there was a little bit of a blood trail, but the blood trail kind of stopped. And so him and his partner got out. His partner's freaking out, like, why would you do that? What are you doing? And as they're looking around for it, you know, thinking, Justin was very confident that this shot would have killed it, you know, but, and this was a learning experience for me too. Just because you shoot something doesn't mean it necessarily dies immediately. So like, and that happens commonly with deer hunting, right? You shoot a deer and it'll run away for a mile or two before it finally dies, you know? And so they're looking around trying to see if they can find this thing. And he claims that there was 2 younger Sasquatch in the area. And they had kind of split up. They were about to split up, him and his hunting partner, and they both saw these young ones. And his hunting partner saw the look on Justin's face and said, don't shoot one of the little ones. And then they split up. And Justin kept walking around. He said, all right, I won't do it. And he stops near the bottom of this hill, and he looks up, and one of the younger ones is standing up there. And his immediate thought is, well, we can prove that this happened if I do this. And so he shoots it, and he shoots the young one through the throat, and it falls down the hill, kind of lands at his feet. And sorry, it's going to get into the grotesque details here, but he claims that he saw that it was bleeding out, so he put it out of its misery with his foot, and he picked it up. You know, what I hear online all the time is that, you know, he held it in his arms as it died. That's not the story that Justin told me. The story was that it was dead, and he picked it up, and it was looking at it. He was looking at it, and it freaked him out because it looked so human that he thought, holy cow, I just did something really, really bad. And his buddy, hearing the shot, came over and was like, what the F did you do? You know, and he says that they knew there was a game warden down at the end of the road, and since they were hunting bear, they didn't want to necessarily take this thing and have it in the back of the truck and get searched by the game warden and find, you know, what looks like to be the body of a human child in there, you know, all covered in hair. So they hastily buried the body, and not even really buried. They didn't dig a hole or anything. They just kind of covered it up with stuff with the intention of coming back the following weekend and retrieving it. So they left and completely dumbfounded at what had happened. And then the following day, the whole area snowed. I mean, the place is at 7,000 feet elevation, so it got 8 feet of snow, and they weren't able to come back out for 5 weeks. And there was a sample that was collected, supposedly. It was DNA tested by another controversial DNA test, which will also get discussed in the whole documentary. So it's a whole can of worms that I'm going to be opening up. And that story, as crazy as it is really only the beginning of a much crazier story. So.
How much validity do you put in it yourself? Do you think that like everything is exactly as it is, or do you think some of the details got changed? Because I know that, like, you know, you're in a high moment of fear on top of just that happening in general. I mean, there may be some things that kind of get shifted around in the story just because it's hard to remember things once you kind of hit that state. But also on the other side, I mean, if you shoot this thing and it ends up being a Sasquatch, it's like, it makes you wonder what like the drawback could be on you potentially too, where you might change some of the details so that you don't get yourself in as much trouble with it. Because I mean, I know in some states they actually have it as like an endangered species, and I don't know if it's more like intended as a joke, but I mean, like, you know, depending as the state, I mean, who knows what the repercussions could possibly be of this thing. And if you did actually shoot one of these things and you could like prove the existence of it at that point, like, again, how much of the drawback would end up coming back on you for shooting one of these things if it is discovered fully and it is, quote, an endangered species, like, even if it hasn't gotten that mark yet?
Right. Well, it's not a protected species here in the state of California, but I don't know. I can understand, you know, because you hear that story from hunters all the time that, you know, they couldn't pull the trigger because it looked so human. But here is, you have a guy who's 24 years old and is just like acting impulsively. And it was only after the fact that he realized that it looked so human and that it really freaked him out. I don't know how much stock I put into the story. It's definitely, it's really, really bizarre. Mm-hmm. What I can tell you is I did a sit down interview with Justin and he told the story. And then we went to the actual site where he claims it happened, and he told the story again while walking me through the whole area, retracing his steps, and he told the exact same story. And even going back, you can, if you Google his name, you can find there's 2 documentaries that were done on him. And in one of them, you know, he tells the story exactly the same way, you know, and those documentaries were made a year after it happened. So he's still telling the exact same story, the exact same way. And in one of those documentaries, he does a polygraph test. And as far as I understand, he's done 3 polygraph tests, and each time he passed with a 98%. And so from what I understand, you know, they say, well, polygraph tests aren't, you know, admitted in court because you can lie. Well, you know, if you're lying and you're a good liar, you can pass with a 75, 80%. But if you're lying, you're not going to pass with a 98%. So that's where it's like, okay, maybe there's something to this, you know? And then you also have the sample as well. So, and that there's a lot going on there as well. It was tested twice. Once it came back as bear, and the other time in the more controversial DNA study, they claimed that it was fallen angel Nephilim DNA, which I have no idea how you would even know that.
Yeah, where's the base for that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, as far as I know, there's been no, you know, angel DNA sequence done. So I don't think we can compare it to, you know, anything, because that's how DNA tests work, right? You sequence the DNA and then you compare it to other animals that have been sequenced. So it's like, you know, you would compare it and it's like, okay, this, you know, is a 99% match with bear. Well, okay, so where's the match with the angel DNA? That doesn't make sense to me, you know?
No, we're bearing the lead there. I mean, Sasquatch, screw that. We've discovered aliens and Nephilim and angels now. That's the real story.
Yeah, so but I'm super excited to start digging into that whole can of worms with this series. I think it's going to be pretty controversial, but I'm really excited for it. So
See, I see 2 potential outcomes with that. Either one, the one thing you got to take into consideration is the fact that when somebody makes outrageous claims, being a researcher, I kind of come at it from one of 2 ways. Either one, I mean, you got to sit down and talk to the person, interview them, kind of be able to read their body language and stuff a bit to really assess it. But on the other side, it's like if people are coming out here and they're making these ridiculous claims, either one, you could throw them out to the side and just say it's too ridiculous. But on the other side, it's like people don't just come out and make claims like that unless there is something to it, because it's like you can read the person when you're talking to them to know if they're the type of person that's just going to make up an outrageous story, or if it's somebody that actually went through something and they're trying to tell the story and it just sounds outrageous. So I mean, there's 2 different sides to that. But I mean, there's one other potential thing that I could see which would make sense with, you know, why he came up positive on a polygraph test, why the story doesn't ever change from what he's originally told. And that's the possibility that maybe he did shoot a bear, but he believed it was a Sasquatch. So he's not like lying in his own head and it actually was a bear. And that's why he's not lying from the story. It's just he thought it was a Sasquatch, ended up being a bear. But I mean, you can kind of take it both ways. It's either one, it was a bear from the first place, or on the other side, there is really, really something to it, and that's why he would even come out and make this claim in the first place. Otherwise, like, you know, this would be something that you wouldn't tell anybody, and if you did, again, you have to check into the back record and see if this is the type of person that makes up these stories. But, I mean, I'm sure getting to sit down and talk to him, like, did you sense anything in him that, like, he was just telling his honest truth as he was, like, retelling you the story?
That's, he was very genuine. So, you know, I'll tell you this, 2 things that kind of make me believe him. But again, you know, I'm hesitant to say that I completely 100% believe him because I don't know. I wasn't there, you know. But one thing he said, well, one thing that I was told when I was, you know, because, you know, I had the concept of the idea. I was like, okay, you know, this would be a really cool documentary if I could do it, you know? And so I'm asking people around, you know, who is this guy? There's rumors that, he's in jail right now for poaching. And it's like, okay, well, that wasn't true because he's not in jail. So,
and he's worried about the law. Why would he come out and tell this story? Because again, he could get in trouble for poaching on top of that just from telling this story. Because if a DNR person hears this, they're not going to go Sasquatch. They're going to say this dude shot a damn bear.
Yeah. Well, and then the other one, people were telling me, well, he's just going to ask you for like $10,000 to do this interview. Well, then I finally got a hold of him, asked him to do the interview. Yeah, I'll do it. No money asked, nothing. Haven't paid the dude a cent, So it's like, okay, well, there's one thing there. And then, he's very honest. We were talking about it and talking about the aftermath of the whole, like, how did this affect your life? He is very open and honest about how it ruined his life for like 15 years. Mm-hmm. He's still feeling the effects, financially and, because people know him. It was national news in 2011, 2012 that he did this. People know his name. And so he's getting a job, and people don't want to hire him because, oh, here's this whack job who, claims he shot and killed 2 Bigfoot, and then not only that, one of them was a young one. So either he is telling the truth and he killed a young Sasquatch. And so, he's a piece of shit, or he's lying about it and just claims that he killed a young Sasquatch. So he's still a piece of shit. You know what I mean? So it's like, really, that's the other thing too, is like, it's such a bizarre story to make up, and one that quite frankly makes him look really, really bad. Yeah. And that's like another thing too. It's like, why tell this story if it makes you look terrible? Well,
that's something that we talk about a lot on the show, just various people we've talked to. And, I'm not going to say that there's not hoaxers out there. Those things do exist, but I think they're relatively few and far between. And I think most people who claim to experience something like this, at the very least, they believe this happened. Whether it happened exactly like they say it did, that's almost irrelevant because, I'm sure in your experience, you've done far more research and talking to people than we have. People get emotional about these things. They believe the stories they're telling 99% of the time. And like you said, nobody really benefits from any of this financially or anything like that. So, I think where I tend to fall on it, and not to speak for Shayn, but, we've talked to a lot of people, is I think the people believe that something happened that's very strange at the very least. And, whether it's a Sasquatch or, something else, something weird probably still happened one way or the other.
Right.
All right, y'all, we got to take a break and pay some bills.
But if you guys hate ads, well, you guys can get ad-free and early access on Patreon for just $1 a month. And it's a great way to support the show. And if you'd like to get some extra video content and merch store discounts, there are a few other tiers with additional benefits with 7-day free trials available for most.
And now back to the show.
And even in that case too, what was that one bear's name? There was a bipedal bear that had been discovered. I don't know if it was like part of like a zoo or something. It was called like, was it Patty maybe, or Petty, or I don't know, something like that. But like, it's not, they have found bears that walk bipedally. So even going to like this guy's defense, if there was something maybe wrong with this bear, something, wrong with its feet or its front paws, and it learned how to walk on its back feet or something, just bringing in the validity of it still possibly being a bear, and this guy fully still believing the story that he saw a Sasquatch just because it was bipedal. You do see that once in a great while in nature. So even beyond that, if he came across the bipedal bear, that is a whole other story all on its own. Regardless if it was a Sasquatch or not, like how often do you come past the bipedal bear? Like anytime people have discovered them, like they get named and they become like a thing that people talk about and want to do research on.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. What kind of rules out the bipedal bear thing for me, at least, is Justin is a lifelong hunter. And one of the primary things he hunts, he gets his bear tag every year. In fact, he was so good at hunting bear that the state of California paid him to go into areas to take out, invasive bears.
Bear assassin.
You kind of like Lake Tahoe and stuff like that, where the bear problem is really bad. They would bring in Justin to take out these bears. So like if there's anyone who knows bears and knows what a bipedal bear would look like, it's Justin. So again, that's like kind of like, well, I don't think this guy shot a bear and didn't realize it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's kind of weird. The whole thing's weird, man.
That's the whole thing with hunters and Sasquatch, though, that a lot of people don't take into consideration. Like, you hear these stories, but they're coming from hunters that spend their entire life in the woods. They never see anything weird. And half the time when you end up talking to hunters, they don't even necessarily want to call it a Sasquatch. They'll just say, like, I saw this, like, weird bipedal, like, hairy creature. Like, they seem to try to avoid that. And I think a lot of people people forget, like, how much time hunters spend out here. Like, they know the sounds of everything. They've seen everything amounts of time. Like, they know the woods. So if a hunter comes out and they start making these claims, it's like, in my opinion, I feel like there's not anybody else you should take that story into consideration more than a hunter, because they know the woods. Like, those are the epitome of the people that would know what they're seeing.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
And I mean, since we've been on the topic of Sasquatch, and you mentioned UFOs in the beginning, so I know at some point here, Orin's probably going to want to dive into some of your UFO stuff. And, you know, I know you go on shows and you dive into Sasquatch, so we'll try to mix it up and do stuff a little bit different for you. But I always got to ask, since you're a Sasquatch researcher, like, what is your understanding of Sasquatch? Like, I know everybody's still trying to discover it. Like, nobody really knows for sure. So it's honestly just making an educated guess. But coming from somebody who, you know, spends his life out there researching this thing, trying to discover it, like, what do you think Sasquatch is exactly?
Personally, I think it is an unknown great ape here in North America, unknown to modern science. I think plenty of people have seen these things and they kind of know what they are. But yeah, I'm definitely a more flesh and blood aper, if you will. I think a lot of the, you know, let me show you here. Is that it? Yeah. So this book here, The Phenomenal Sasquatch by Matt Pruitt, is probably one of the best books to come out about Sasquatch in years and years. And, you know, because people talk about the zapping effect and talk about people, you know, maybe this thing has the ability to make you freeze. And, you know, Matt Pruitt goes through a lot of these arguments and provides a biological basis for why these things might be happening. He doesn't deny that these things are happening because, you know, people see these things and they freeze up. Well, it's also like, that's also a biological response. And, you know, he compares to, that's one of the amazing things I find about, especially when it comes to the topic of Sasquatch. People will never look at native culture or native folklore unless it comes to the Sasquatch. And it's like, well, where do bears fit? You know, because you have Pruitt goes through and he lists legends about lions, tigers, and bears. You know, we're talking about large apex predators. What do the native people and their folklore have to say about these large, extremely dangerous predators? Well, interestingly, worldwide, all of them have the ability to make you freeze. All of them have extra dimensional abilities. So it's like, that's kind of interesting. We know tigers, lions, and bears don't have, you know, the ability to go into a different dimension, but all the folklore says that they do. So what do? We throw out the science that we do have and just in favor of folklore. You know, not that folklore isn't important, but especially when you're looking in the comparing it to the topic of Sasquatch would certainly fit within a large, potentially dangerous animal, you know, and there are stories of them, you know, stealing children, stealing women. For what purposes? You know, maybe to eat them. We don't know. So there's definitely that going on. And then you also have the ability where there's always this paranormal, supernatural ability attributed to these animals that they have control over you. Well, when you look through at our human biology, it's also endemic amongst the other great apes, this freeze moment where it's almost like you have no control over yourself. Well, it's an evolutionary mechanism to keep us alive. You know, it's the same thing like if you put your hand on a hot stove, your arm will move your hand out of the way before you even feel the pain, because that's like deeply embedded into our biology, you know. And they think it was a defense mechanism against snakes. A lot of the times, if you ever are out in the woods or in a field somewhere and you come across a snake, you'll notice that you jump out of the way before you even register that what you're seeing is a snake. Well, how does that work? You know, is that a supernatural ability that the snake has? Or is that a survival mechanism that's built deep into our DNA? And that's like, you think about if you're walking through your house and someone jumps around the corner and scares you, the very first thing you do is you freeze up, right? Does that mean that person has a supernatural power over you? You know, it's like, no, it's a fear response to freeze up. And especially if you're seeing something, you know, obviously it takes you half a second to realize, oh, this is someone playing a joke on me. But if you're out in the woods somewhere and you come across a bear, or you come across a lion or a tiger or a Sasquatch, how much longer is it going to take you to process what you're seeing, you know?
Yeah, and that's something, you know, we've talked about on the show a lot, is even if these cryptids are, you know, for all intents and purposes, just flesh and blood entities, like you said, if you're out in the woods and see this weird thing, like if we're driving to work tomorrow morning and a giraffe crosses the street, that's a really weird thing. We're probably going to stop and pause and, you know, be a little bit freaked out, even though that's a thing we know exists. So if you're in this heightened state already and you see this even more bizarre thing, I mean, I think what you're saying makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I do too.
Honestly, like even going back into the folklore too, it's like there's still always a root of truth to the folklore. So, I mean, that completely makes sense. And that kind of makes you wonder, like, how many other things maybe with Sasquatch that we're maybe looking at as, like, folklore, but it might actually have something to it. And it's just a matter of trying to understand it from, like, a different perspective. But if you're looking at it from the folklore perspective, you know, of course, it's going to sound like a ridiculous claim. But if you start putting it into, like, real-world understanding of things that we understand now that they didn't understand back when they were creating this folklore, then it completely, like, would make sense with these certain connecting pieces. Like, I mean, even just like the stuff with Sasquatch with, you know, like supposedly walking through portals and stuff like that. And then you were mentioning with the other apex predators, the walking through portals, you know, looking at that in a real world context now, you see that that's camouflage. It's a matter of like these things would basically walk behind a tree and disappear. And these people would be like, oh, this thing just disappeared into a portal. And you read that and you hear that and you say, oh, that sounds ridiculous. But you look at it from that perspective and it just shows that these things have some type of like really good camouflage where they appear to disappear once they walk behind something. So, I mean, even looking at it from the aspect of like Sasquatch, like, you know, if you're viewing it from that standpoint, you can just take into consideration these things have really, really good camouflage. And one suggestion that I've made a million times is like, you know, everybody reports seeing like dark hair, brownish colors, you know, they'd be covered in dirt. Sometimes there'll be moss and stuff on it. So if you're looking at it from the camouflage perspective, like the human eye only catches things when it's moving. So if these things are standing next to a tree and they're completely still and they blend in with the color of the trees, you could walk right past this thing and you wouldn't see it unless it moves its arm or it moves some part of its body. Like, you know, even a jaguar, as brightly colored and beautiful as they are, you know, you put them out in the wild, they'll be sitting up in a tree. You're not going to see it until it moves because it's going to have this perfect blend of camouflage until your eye catches movement again.
Right. Yeah, Well, I think also on that point too, Pruitt also goes through stories and folklore of the other great apes. So specifically gorillas and orangutans, you know, gorillas were often thought to be, you know, forest people and they have their own tribes, you know, and it's like, well, we know that gorillas live in troops of like no more than 10. So it's like, I guess that is a tribe, you know, but it's not a tribe in the sense that we might have a tribe, right? Where everyone's got a designated role, you know. But or orangutan, you look at what the word orangutan means, you know, and I'm very specific in pronouncing it because, you know, people say orangutan, and orangutan means a very poor person, and orangutan means wise man of the woods. So it's like, again, within the language, they're viewing them almost as people. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a people, but that's the way they're viewed. And, you know, you look at Native American traditions, they always think Sasquatch are a people, that they live in tribes. And it's like, well, is it possible that it's another gorilla situation, you know?
I mean, if you're looking at it from that perspective too, I know we've made this suggestion a million times on the show, but when people actually have these Sasquatch sightings, like some of the big ones going back to like the 70s, 50s, all that stuff, is it a matter of, if you're viewing it from a pack mentality, you know, you have like the Sigma type, which are the ones that don't necessarily fit in with the pack, or you have the ones where like the male gets old enough and the pack may only have one specific male. So then they got to go off and they got to find their own territory. They got to find their own pack, their own family. And is that what usually happens with these like roadside crossings, or when people actually have these like a little bit more aggressive encounters with Sasquatch, where they're not necessarily coming after them to hurt them, but you know, they'll like bluff charge them, things like that. It's like the younger males or the males that have been kicked out of the pack to go and find their own area, and that's their process of learning that they may get seen sometimes because they haven't rediscovered the area that they're trying to establish themselves in, because they're just getting out and exploring it.
Well, going even further, I'm sorry, we will talk UFOs. Trust.
Oh no, you're good, man. Keep going.
But when it comes like observation again amongst the animal kingdom, you look at orangutans and the way they live. So an orangutan male will have his territory of 15 square miles, and within that 15 square miles, there are several females who have their own smaller territories. And so throughout a year, he'll go through and basically procreate with all these females in his territory. And each time he arrives in the next area, he'll get on top of a ridgetop and let out a long howl. So it's like, is that what the Ohio howl, is that what that was? Was that a male coming to service his females and announcing his presence with a long howl? Because long howls, they do happen, but they don't happen that often. So it's like, why are they doing that? To me, that's the best theory as to why they happen. Mm-hmm. But again, we don't know because we haven't really observed it. We haven't studied them enough. But I think that's another good example of comparing what we've seen with Sasquatch with other great apes.
I mean, if you're looking at it from that perspective too, the whooping would make sense, because usually, like, a lot of people have theories on the whooping that it's, one, letting other ones know how many humans are in the area, for example, or it's a way they communicate with each other over long distances. But again, from that perspective, you'll do your loud sound in order to like call in the females. And then with like birds and stuff like that, they'll do these like short burst sounds where they actually are physically trying to find each other. And then on top of that, they'll also like release pheromones so that they can pick up on each other's smells and they can kind of come into the area. So is the whole whooping concept a matter of they've entered the area, they've announced that they're there, and now they're trying to do that portion of trying to exactly find each other? And also all the smells that people encounter, is that them giving off either a pheromone to scare people away or scare other predators, other things away, or is it also possibly a pheromone that they put out to draw the females in? Or on the other side, is it the females putting out a pheromone to draw the males in?
Well, to compare it again to another animal, gorillas, we've discovered that gorillas release their pheromones through their armpits, and that they actually have conscious control of when to release the pheromones, and they can close it as well. So then they stop releasing pheromones. So it's very interesting when you hear these stories of people like, it was the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life, and then it just stopped smelling, And so it's like, do these things have that ability as well? It's unusual. And that's the other thing too. It's not a 1-to-1 to any one specific species. Otherwise it would be a gorilla. Otherwise it would be an orangutan, but it's a unique combination of characteristics from different animals, because it is a different animal.
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be back with that bizarre stuff you crave. But
if you would like to rock some gear for your favorite podcast or creature, hop on over to the OMM merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly.
the most recent design available is the SQUATCH Country Fear and Loathing parody design, with Sasquatch as Hunter S. Thompson and Mothman as Dr. Gonzo, with artwork by Chris Holm of the Conspiracy Theory podcast. And we are back with the high strangeness. Let's get back into it. And I guess before we get too far into the Sasquatch stuff, as fascinating as this is, I want to make sure that we have time to cover the UFO stuff, because again, like you seem to never get to really talk about the UFO stuff on the show. So I guess a good spot to start with that, at least, is what exactly kind of got you into the UFO phenomenon and researching it? Like, was it a personal experience, just a fascination with it? And where has it kind of drawn you to now as far as like your stance on UFO research and what exactly you believe these things are and where they're coming from?
Oof. Wow.
Kind of a loaded question. I was trying to kind of set the pace to get you rolling a little bit.
Yeah. Also, let's go for like another half hour to talk about UFOs and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I didn't have any personal experiences with UFOs. I don't think I've seen a UFO to this day, but it is kind of personal. So, long story short, I covered this in an episode of Mysteries and Monsters, but essentially there's this story of Kenneth Arnold, who in July 1947, he was a cargo pilot flying from Yakima. He was flying from Chehalis, Washington to Yakima, Washington. And he was flying, I guess, out east, and he saw these craft that were flying from, I think it was Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, and they were going at super, super top speeds that were not possible at that time. And he described them as kind of bouncing up and down, skipping like you would a saucer across water. Well, the journalists took that and they created the term flying saucer. So that's where the flying saucer term comes from, 1947. Well, that made international news, and a bunch of people were writing letters to him, and so many that he couldn't even respond to. Well, Kenneth Arnold's granddaughter was going through his letters, and there's this great researcher up there in the Centralia area of Washington. His name's Vince Izunza. He's a friend of mine. He brought the UFO, the Chehalis Flying Saucer Festival, to kind of commemorate Kenneth Arnold and whatnot. And that's kind of a yearly event in July. And no, I think it's September he does it. I can't remember. It's been a few years since I've been, but it's a great event. If you ever have the chance, it's in Chehalis. It's a wonderful event. Well, he reached out to his granddaughter to bring her into, hey, you're the granddaughter of Kenneth Arnold. We're doing this festival for Kenneth Arnold. You should be there. So she does a presentation every year. Well, she went through some of his old letters and stuff and found this one like really cryptic letter addressed to him. And this guy was claiming that he knew the truth behind, the flying saucers and knew who piloted them. Gosh. And then he signed it. His name was Everett H. Lee, president of the Olympian Society, Temecula, California. Temecula, California is my hometown.
Wow.
And so Vince Izunza put on Instagram one day, he said, do I know anyone in Temecula or near Temecula? And I said, hey, I live in Temecula. What's up? So he filled me in on all these details, and we started working on this case together. And Everett H. Lee was this, essentially he was a cult leader, and he had this UFO cult, and he claims that he came here to Temecula from Long Beach, California, and started up this compound where he lived with like 7 or 8 other people, and that he had made contact with flying saucers on top of Mount Olympus in Temecula. And I was like, Mount Olympus, Temecula? I've never even heard of this. And so we started digging into it, and we found what remains of the compound and the buildings where they lived. Unfortunately, none of these people had children, because I've dug very, very deep into their personal records, and all of the people who were part of this never had any children. So there's no one to interview. And it's just kind of a really bizarre case. And that's kind of what got me into more of the UFO research. I kind of started I think that's a cool starting point is, 1947 flying saucers, you know what I mean? So, and then there's, I immediately dug into the George Adamski case, which is here in Palomar, which is very close, actually very, very close to Mount Olympus. George Adamski was probably one of the most famous contactees, probably the most famous contactee of the 1950s era. So it's really bizarre, the history of UFOs, because you have very significant different eras. So the 1940s, you have flying saucers. 1947 was called the Summer of Flying Saucers. And you get into the 1950s and you have these quasi spiritualist cult leaders rising up, all claiming to have contact with the Space Brothers. And, they want world peace. And, they're espousing these kind of Buddhist, kind of like revisionist Christianity ideas. Jesus was actually a space brother from Venus, kind of things. And then 1961, you have the Betty and Barney Hill incident, and that immediately changes the narrative on what aliens and UFOs are, because now all of a sudden you have these things are coming from outer space to probe us. And then, because Roswell happened in 1947 and several crashes happened throughout the late 40s, but those stories were so well covered up that they didn't really revive until the 90s. So, like Roswell wasn't really in the UFO discourse in 1947. It was a little bit, because they first came out and said we recovered this flying saucer, and then the next day they're like, oh, it was actually a weather balloon. Well, that was enough to silence most people from talking about it. And it wasn't until the 90s or the 80s when Stanton Friedman dug back into it and was like, no, there was something else going on here, And so again, the narrative changed and it really became this kind of cover-up scenario. It's like, what is the government hiding? And I think that's a very valid question, because what are they hiding? Because they're definitely hiding something. So, that's kind of got into it from the historical aspect.
Well, I think that's really interesting what you said about like the different eras of, kind of UFO visitations, because that's something we've talked about on the show previously as well. Like prior to the Betty and Barney Hill incident, it seems like people thought of these visitors as space men. They were more human, like, kind of the more Nordic depiction of aliens. And then once, Betty and Barney Hill happened, it was all the grays all the time, pretty much at that point. So, there's a lot of theories. I'm sure, you've dug into them about like the grays could be some sort of non-biological entity and things like that. Like, what are your thoughts on, I guess, maybe the different varieties of extraterrestrial? Do you think that it's, different species, or what do you think's going on there?
I don't know. I take a very kind of non-committal stance to aliens themselves, because what it seems like to me, let me throw this in there real quick. When the flying saucers were first appearing in the 1940s, you have to remember aircraft was very, very new. Like most people in the 1940s had never even seen a helicopter before because they were so new, and they're doing all these, experiments, and it's a time of extreme change. You're talking about World War I, we have trench warfare. In World War II, we're having full-on dogfights with tanks and atomic bombs. It's like, whoa, that is a major, major shift in a very short amount of time. So even in the very beginning, people didn't even think that these things were coming from outer space. They thought they were experimental aircraft. And it wasn't until I think it was Edward Ruppelt, who was a colonel at the Air Force. He came out with a book called, I can't remember. Something with flying saucers in it. And it was one of the first books about UFOs. And he proposed the idea that they're actually extraterrestrial in origin. And that's like, whoa, these are spacemen, it's like, and then the George Adamskis of the world kind of hopped onto it and were like, yeah, and they're space brothers. And it's like, yeah, I don't know if that's true.
It all came full circle though, because now everybody's theorizing these things are actually coming from under the surface now. So it's funny how it came full circle on that it seems like at least a good portion of the UFO community now theorizes that grays are actually coming from under the earth, and that's why they're gray, and that's why they appear that they are the way they are, is because they're actually like cave dwellers or like inner earth dwellers. So it's just so weird that everything ends up coming back in circles.
Yeah, it is strange. But what it seems like to me, to fully answer your question, is like people are seeing this very real phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the discourse is who's piloting them. And no one can agree on that. And, you know, I haven't dug deep enough into all the stories. You know, Betty and Barney Hill is one that I've dug into deep. And I definitely think something happened to them. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know, dude. I wasn't there. I was, it was like, you know, I wish I could say that it's like, oh, all these different species of aliens are coming from different, you know, planets and things like that. But I really don't know if that's what's going on, you know?
Yeah. And we kind of like the idea that, you know, whatever these things are, whether they're truly extraterrestrials or ultra terrestrials or whatever.
Even humans we've theorized a few times.
Have the ability, to present themselves in different ways, because I think it would be, you know, it would be very egotistical of us as humans to think, oh, there's all these powerful, ancient extraterrestrial civilizations, you know, interested in us and fighting over us. So, you know, I think it makes a lot of sense that whatever these things are, they can present themselves in different ways to different people. And kind of segueing off of that, a question that I think you're probably uniquely qualified to answer. Being that you are kind of more of a flesh and blood Sasquatch researcher, what is your opinion on kind of all these stories about the connections between UFOs and Sasquatch, you know, with like sightings of orbs and things like that, and all these weird situations where all these different phenomenon are observed together or, you know, very close to one another?
Well, I'll say this. When it comes to Sasquatch, I am flesh and blood. When it comes to other situations, I'm very open to the paranormal. You know, I've had my own paranormal ghost stories, you know, I've seen things. So it's like, and I am a religious person as well. So it's like, I'm not, there is paranormal stuff. There are weird things that we can't necessarily explain. I think Sasquatch is not one of them. I think we can explain Sasquatch, but as far as like Sasquatch and aliens being seen together, I haven't come across, I'll be honest, I haven't come across any credible reports of them being seen together. I know people will go out in areas, isolated areas out in the woods to look for Sasquatch, and they end up seeing a UFO or they end up seeing an orb. And I think it's like, well, how much of that does that have to do with Sasquatch? You know what I mean? It's like, if you go out in the woods and you see a bunch of deer, did the Sasquatch put the deer there? You know, no. But you're in an area where there's not a whole lot of people. And, you know, when there's not a whole lot of people, you don't have light pollution. Oh, what am I talking about? I have seen a UFO. Dude.
Glad that we brought it up because now you remembered.
Yeah. Mount St. Helens, when I was there for Ape Canyon, we camped out there for 3 nights. No light pollution. Absolutely beautiful stars. Very first night I'm there. You know, we're seeing satellites go by, we're seeing planes go by, and we see this yellow light up in the sky. And one of the guys there, Jared, he has this like extremely bright beam flashlight, and he just decided to shine it up there. Not a smart thing to do, especially if it was a plane, but that was the crazy part, right? It wasn't making noise. It's a bright yellow light, and it's moving across the sky, moving east. And then he hits it with the flashlight and it turns 90 degrees and flies out north. And I was like, what? And he's over here like, yeah, it was just a plane. I was like, dude, I was like, first of all, planes don't glow bright yellow. And then on top of that, they didn't have the indicator lights, the red and the green. If it's a plane, it's got to have the red and the green. And then on top of that, how did it change directions so freaking fast? You know, and then it came back from the same direction. It came back from out of the north, and it glowed real bright and then took off. It made another 90-degree turn, ended up going back out east even faster. No noise. And we're hearing the planes as they go overhead. So I'm like, I don't know what this is. So again, strange, but it's like, was Sasquatch around? Was it trying to drop off the Sasquatch in the Ape Canyon? I don't think so. I think it's just because we were in a spot where there is no light pollution, we can see it. You know what I mean? You think about like LA has so much smog and so much light pollution, you can't even see the stars. How many UFOs are flying over LA every single day and you just can't see it, So there's that aspect to it as well. When it comes to orbs, dude, the orbs, I don't know what those are.
They connect with all three of the main phenomenon. You get it: paranormal, cryptids, and UFOs. There's some kind of common thing between all of them, or something is interested in them.
Well, it's like, the whole Ron Moorhead Sierra Sounds, we talked about it a little bit, he reported seeing orbs, but years and years after the fact. So I always just assumed, oh, well, here's another Bigfoot researcher who spent his whole life looking for Bigfoot, didn't find it, and so he decided to go, well, they're supernatural, that's why I couldn't find them. Well, then I'm doing this series in the Sierras, and I'm interviewing people very close to the Sierra site, and they're saying they've seen orbs there too, and they have no idea about Ron Moorhead seeing orbs.
They mentioned the rods too, like he did, because those are like another weird phenomenon that kind of plays in with the orbs, is that Ron Moorhead was specifically saying he was seeing like the floating rods too.
Interesting, yeah. And so, there's theories that could be, the Sierras are basically entirely made out of granite. And so sometimes there's a geological thing where it's like granite is conducive to creating crystals. And so under immense amount of pressure, like weight, if you have gigantic mountains crushing all this granite, it can send up like an electrical orb. But that's not necessarily what people are seeing because they seem to be acting intelligently. So it's like, yeah, I would love to say that these things are like just normal geological phenomenon. Strange, but normal. It's like, no, they're acting independently, and they seem to be reacting to you reacting to them, which is even more weird. And it's like, if it was just like an electric orb floating through the sky, it wouldn't react to you at all, but the fact that they're changing colors, changing size, moving along trails, moving along cliff faces, changing directions, like that's weird. I don't know what that is, I wish I could say, but it's weird.
I mean, even diving into the UFO stuff, we've kind of theorized on the show too that if you're looking at the UFO phenomenon and the aspect of with abduction, that it's more so like their variation of like scientific research, like almost like how we would go into the wild and we would like tag some fish and then we keep an eye on the fish just out of curiosity and what they're going to do, like where they're going to travel to, like how they're going to react to things. If they're viewing the world as, basically like a giant research project, you'd have to take into consideration that, why wouldn't they want to research Sasquatch too? Especially if they had some type of like advanced technology where they might be able to find these things easier, like flying over and being able to shift at any possible point and be able to keep like thermo on something is a totally different thing. Cause like you can use thermo with a helicopter, but you got to do the wide turnaround and come back to it. And there's a good chance things can get away. But if you have like a UFO that you can pivot and change directions, like, beside them actually being connected, just taking into consideration the fact that, if they're trying to research everything on this planet, that would be another aspect of the planet that they would try to research, like if you're seeing some weird UFOs in the woods, like, and you're also Sasquatch researching, like maybe go and check that area. It's not that they're getting dropped off, but rather again, that they're interested in them and they want to figure out what their habits are, what they do, like maybe even take DNA from them because they seem to have this fascination with keeping a DNA database, which, sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but I mean, even humans do that. We keep databases of DNA and of different seeds and of everything else. Like, it's just part of research.
Right.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. But before we get into this break, if you might be interested in joining a growing community of like-minded individuals, then pop on over to the Open Minds Media Telegram, a place to discuss high strangeness, conspiracies, and anything else on your mind. Bizarre and open-minded individuals always welcome. Link to join available down in the show description. And we are back, so let's get back to it.
Well, to kind of change topics a little bit about that, the whole idea of, these UFOs and stuff having technology that we don't have is something I definitely 100% believe in. And, my most recent documentary that came out in December was about the Aztec UFO crash. And so it was 1948 in March, a UFO essentially crash landed in Aztec, New Mexico. And it was discovered and covered up very, very quickly. And a lot of people still think it's a hoax. If you Google the Aztec UFO crash, it'll come up as Aztec UFO hoax. Well, I can tell you it's not a hoax. I interviewed people who have been looking into the Aztec case for like 30 years, and it's definitely, there's a lot going on there. And, basically how it got deemed as a hoax was there was this writer named Frank Scully who wrote the book Behind the Flying Saucers. And that came out in 1950. And in it, he broke the story of the Aztec UFO case. Well, immediately the FBI moved in like a month after him publishing that book, and were like, oh, well, his friends are these oil men who, and they concocted all this strange stories about how they had cheated people out of their money. So therefore, Frank Scully is a liar and the Aztec UFO case is not real. So it's like, so this whole thing is a hoax because people he tangentially knew might have ripped some people off. That's why it's not real. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, but that's enough. You read through the Wikipedia article and it's like, well, he was friends with these con artists. And then you look into the details of the court cases, and all this stuff is public information that it took these dedicated researchers to dig up. And they were like, wait, these people brought them to court on behest of the FBI to say that they were being scammed out of their money, when there's a clear paper trail that they were getting their payments as were agreed. So the whole thing that they were even con artists and scam artists isn't even true. And then they get slammed with these charges that they're con artists, and then there's no charges brought against them. It's almost like it wasn't true. It's like, so that's very, very interesting. But Frank Scully in his book says he talked to a scientist who worked on the Aztec UFO and reverse engineered some of the tech. And in the book, he's called Dr. G. Well, my good friends Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, they did digging and they found the identity of Dr. G, who was actually a conglomerate of like 7 different scientists that Frank Scully had talked to. And all 7 of those scientists went on to found Texas Instruments, which brought us all sorts of advanced technology like laser pointers, thermal, X-ray. It's like, interesting. Where did that technology come from? Were these guys just really, really smart, or did it have something to do with reverse engineered UFO tech?
Yeah, and it seems like with the Roswell situation, a lot of people who were involved with that either tangentially or directly, same kind of thing happened. Like the guy who came up with fiber optic cable was like involved in Roswell. So yeah, like you said, it kind of makes you wonder, all these people that have this common thread, it kind of makes you wonder if there's enough smoke there, there's probably some sort of fire, in my opinion.
Right, anyway. Right. Or even, they're talking about Roswell and they're talking about that, the material that's like aluminum foil, but then it bounces back. And it's like, well, we have that now, right? I think it's Mylar, right? It's like, interesting. Where did we get that from? So I don't know. It's like you said, where there's smoke, there's fire for sure.
I mean, how many people that supposedly do this reverse engineering too will like talk about a specific thing and everybody will throw it out and be like, oh, this person's just making shit up. And then like 10 years later, it pops up. Like one example is like Bob Lazar with, what was it? Element, what is it? Yeah. It was not discovered and everybody's like, oh, this guy's just making shit up. All of a sudden, like 10 years later, boom, here it is. Like, people need to start taking stuff like that in consideration, that you have to look into what people are talking about and then when exactly it pops up. And then you start kind of making these correlations because they sound like ridiculous claims at the time. And then it kind of just gets thrown in with the case of people trying to say it's a hoax. And then it gets that name of being a hoax. But then the exact reasons why people called it a hoax previously are exactly like the things that you start connecting now where you're like, oh, right, that makes sense, but it's still labeled as a hoax, even though this stuff's actually coming out now. It's like, it's a controlled narrative on this stuff, you know? It's like you got to muddy the waters and just throw out every ridiculous claim that you can, because then people don't know where the strap of truth is. And that seems to be where we're going with a lot of like the UFO stuff now, is that it's like you muddy the waters as much as possible so that people can't find the truth within it anymore, because you can't fully control the narrative like you could back in the day.
Well, it's like, dude, but the waters are still so muddied, and I believe they're 100% still doing that stuff today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, what's it going to take? You know, people can't spend, you know, everything that's come out about the Aztec case. They took 30 years to uncover that, and they started back in the early 90s, you know, like 50 years after it happened. So what? We're going to have to wait 80 years to find out whether one story is true?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, and how many stories are coming out? Like these drones over New Jersey. You know, it's like, are we going to have to wait 80 years to know what that is? You know, I don't know. It's like this whole idea of disclosure is coming. It's like, I think we can just point to the drones thing and just be like, it's not.
It's the carrot concept. Coming. They're always going to dangle it in front of your face, but it's always going to be just out of reach. Everybody's going to say it's right there, but it's always just out of reach, and it's going to continue moving the bar the more you start trying to go for it.
Yeah, and it's like, where are the drones now? No one's even talking about them anymore.
Yeah.
Where'd they go?
And, yeah, that's what we've talked about on the show a lot, is this whole disclosure thing is just kind of really annoying to me, because a lot of people want to put a lot of stock in it. And I'm like, okay, so now we're going to start trusting the government. And it seems to me like, you know, at the very least, this is just so the government can have plausible deniability. You know, they can be like, oh, well, we knew something was going on, but we didn't quite know what. And like you said, they're just moving the goalpost constantly.
Yeah.
And, you know, UFOs, aliens, that kind of stuff was my gateway into all these kind of fringe, weird topics. And the whole disclosure thing has like really soured me on a lot of this, just because it just people's reaction to it. And it's made this thing like not as much fun to me for some reason. Like, what's your opinion on the whole disclosure thing, kind of as we start wrapping up, but not to take up too much more of your time, but what do you think about the whole disclosure thing? I know that's a broad topic, but if you don't mind just sharing some quick thoughts with us.
Yeah, no, I mean, dude, I don't think it'll ever come, you know, and I know people will point to like in recent years, oh, there was a congressional hearing on UFOs and stuff like that, you know, and it's like you brought up Bob Lazar earlier, but I think this is a good example. You know, Bob Lazar claims that he was in court, you know, because he was a whistleblower about Area 51. When you look into the court records, he was actually in court because he was running a brothel, an illegal brothel in Las Vegas. And for whatever reason, when he took the stand, he started talking about UFOs, and that's the clip everybody showed. You know, it's like, oh, look, he's in court for UFOs. And it's like, no, he wasn't. He's just talking about random stuff right now that has nothing to do with why he's in court. You know, or even in the Jeremy Corbell documentary he did, and his house got raided. His house got raided because he was selling like illegal chemicals to Russia. You know, it has nothing to do with the fact that he was doing this UFO documentary. You know, so it's like, I haven't looked into these congressional hearings and whatnot, but I know nothing really significant came of them. Yeah. And what were these congressional hearings really about? Were they about UFOs, or were they just some random people just started talking about, we need disclosure, and I know somebody who worked in the government and says that they reverse engineered UFO tech, and it's like, what are you talking about, dude? It's distraction tactics for one. Absolutely. You know, to distract the general public from other things that the government is doing. But on top of that too, it's like you guys said, it's dangling the carrot right in front of you. You know, they're always dipping their toes. We'll release the Tic Tac video 10 years after it was filmed, you know, and be like, see, we're not hiding anything. It's like, no, you are. You are.
Sometimes I wonder if it's just trying to see what the general public knows. Like, you know, they'll come out and be like, all right, this is what's happening. And they'll kind of stir it up to see what people are talking about, just to kind of see where like the narrative currently is. So I wonder if it's like a way that they can kind of see where everything's at, so they can kind of get a feel for the water before they hop in and kind of figure out what's going on. And then on the other side, maybe it's a thing with like liability, that if this stuff starts coming out and people are, going to court and saying that they're being injured by these things, if they at least acknowledge it, then it gets rid of some of the liability of them of completely keeping it a secret. Because if they at least come out and just acknowledge it, then they can at least come out and acknowledge it and say, see, we didn't know anything about it, but we acknowledged that it was happening. But if they completely just don't mention it at all and something comes out, then they don't have any right to claim that they didn't know anything about it.
Right.
Yeah, plausible deniability.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is, man. I don't know. The UFO topic is so big, and there's so much going on there, and it's so hard to know the truth, And
I think now more so than ever.
Yeah.
Like I said, we moved to a spot where they can't control the narrative anymore. When we live in an age where every piece of information is right at your fingertips and anybody can be putting the information out there, rather than fully trying to control it like they could when they actually... people had like a respect for mainstream media and all that stuff. Like now we've gotten to a point where it's like their best way to try to hide something or cover something up is to try to throw as much information as they possibly can that's just out there, ridiculous, just muddy the waters as much as possible, and then hop on to the next thing. Because people nowadays seem to have like a short attention span. So if you go from one big event to the other big event, but you don't give any real answers, you just throw all these theories out, then it ends up becoming this obscure idea. And as time passes, it's going to become a new portion of folklore where nobody got any truth from it, so everybody just kept expanding on it. And then a couple generations later, when you don't have those people anymore that were directly tied to it, then it just becomes this like ridiculous piece of folklore, and then it just gets lost in obscurity at that point. Like it's a new way of controlling the narrative.
But I also think it's even more complex nowadays too, because like I forget the guy's name. There was a guy in the UFO community for years and years and years, and then after decades, he came out and said, yeah, I was implanted by the U.S. government as a disinformation agent. Mm-hmm. So everything I told you isn't true, but part of it is, and it's like, okay. And then now I'm looking at Lou Elizondo, who used to work for the government, and he's claiming, oh, I'm going to bring the truth to you guys while I'm going to the Pentagon every month to, it's like, no, you're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And then on top of that too, I mean, if the government is capable of doing that, are you telling me that they can't have, some dude in the office, whose like job is like this anonymous person on Reddit or anonymous person on 4chan, just putting out information, where some of it is true and most of it is false. And it's like, again, just muddying the waters, making it even more difficult. It's like, where do you go? How do you know who you're talking to on the internet, especially on a website like Reddit or 4chan, where it's all forums and stuff, you can't investigate that person's profile. How do you know they're not using a fake email address? You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. They're masters at their craft, I think.
Hold on tight, guys. This is our last ad break. But if you've got some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends of the show. I Know SQUATCH, Snarly Yow Natural Products, Crypto Teology, and Big Ape Threads.
And our other friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available down in the show notes. And we are back, so let's hop right in. I mean, it's a perfect way to cover up your own technology, too, because just playing devil's advocate, I've theorized a bunch of times, and I did like a full episode on it, saying that I think that a good portion of the UFO phenomenon is actually continued human experiments after World War II and everything. And I'm not saying all of it, but I think that there is a good portion of it that could possibly be that. So, I mean, if you're going out here and you're saying UFOs, UAPs, all this type of shit, then people aren't looking at your technology, or you're trying to shift the focus away from it actually being yours. So it's like even other governments and stuff, like if you're out here and you're testing this stuff and people are actually looking to the skies now and they're seeing this kind of stuff, then, either one, you're going to own up and say it's your technology, or on the other side, you go, man, aliens must be real. Like those are fucking alien saucers, man. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, when realistically, that that's your technology. It's just another layer of the cover up that you're trying to hide it in plain sight by just saying, yeah, that is that phenomenon, when it's actually yours.
Yeah. All good points.
So, Eli, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your thoughts with us tonight. I mean, it's kind of rare that we get somebody who's, in the UFO sphere and the cryptid sphere. So, I mean, this conversation was awesome. If you don't mind, would you tell our listeners where they can find your work or maybe get up in touch with you if they'd like to?
Absolutely. So, I mean, most of my work is all on the Small Town Monsters channel. And so I've done 2 shows for them, Mysteries and Monsters and Bigfoot, The Road to Discovery. So if you go into the playlist tab, you can find playlists, and that has all the episodes on there to make it easy. Because there's lots of stuff coming out on the YouTube channel, and I'm not doing all of it. You know, funny story, someone told me, was like, dang, Eli, I don't know how you're doing it. You're pumping out like hour-long documentaries every week. And I was like, well, I'm not the only one who edits. And they're like, no, dude, it's admirable what you do. And I was like, okay, well, thank you, but I don't do that much. It's like, okay. And then, you know, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, the Eli Watson, that's my stuff. So, and you can always shoot me an email too, eli@smalltownmonsters.com. It's the best way to reach me. So.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to come on today, man, and getting to cover a little bit different of the aspect of your research and actually being able to combine the both. Because like Orin said, it's not too often that we get somebody that's kind of versed in multiple things. And for at least us, like I'm the cryptid guy, he's the UFO guy. So we were able to touch base a little bit for both of us, man. So it was a fun conversation.
It was fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Eli. It's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Yeah. Anytime.
All right, guys, if you've enjoyed this show, which I hope you have, Eli was awesome. But Shayn, if anybody out there wants to get up with us for any reason whatsoever, tell them how they can do that.
Number 1, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones we're the most active on. And if you guys want some funny memes, I've been posting some memes over there on the Instagram, so definitely worth going and following for some cryptid memes and stuff in the process of that. And you guys can also get a hold of us through the submission form, and that is available on the link tree. Whether you guys want to share an encounter, or you guys want to get a hold of us, or you guys want to be a guest, great option to do it. And the last way you guys can get a hold of us is through the hotline. You can either text, call that. Like I said, you guys can either share your encounters, share your opinion on the show, leave some reviews, all that stuff. That number is 313-364-1551. And with that, hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversation. We definitely kept it bizarre over here. We tend to always keep it bizarre over here because, like I say in the beginning, we are the most bizarre show on the internet, and we proudly hold that title. And with all of you guys, I'm going to start calling you guys the Bizarre-ites. The variation of that is supposed to be like Deadites from Evil Dead, but we're all bizarre. You know, we're got to bring in the family for this. We're a big bizarre family. And with being a big bizarre family, you guys always got to remember to always stay bizarre. Bizarre.
He shot a baby squatch.